There's something wrong with the glass house. I didn't know what was happening, but a strange feeling took over me the moment I stepped inside. The child I saw didn't seem real, yet she was there, in every reflection. I couldn't escape, nor understand what was going on. Something was watching me, and I was starting to lose myself in this maze of mirrors. The most terrifying part? I don't know if I'm still inside, or if I've already been completely consumed. Hit play and find out what really happened in that place. I have always been skeptical when it comes to ghost stories. As an investigative journalist, my job was to separate facts from legends, debunk lies, and sometimes confront the inexplicable with a dose of logic. That's how I found myself in front of the glass house, a gleaming monster in the heart of a forgotten town, surrounded by twisted trees and decades of silence. The first time I heard about the house was during a casual conversation with a local while working on a piece about urban myths. He said no one in their right mind would go near that place. The house has eyes, he said, laughing nervously, and they're always watching you. Of course, I laughed too, but the seed of curiosity had already been planted. From the outside, the mansion looked more like a sculpture than a real home. Every wall, ceiling, and door was made of glass, reflecting the surroundings like a distorted kaleidoscope. The afternoon sun turned the structure into a dazzling spectacle, but even in daylight, there was something unsettling about it. It felt like I was being watched, though no one else was around. I entered for the first time in the late afternoon, armed with my equipment. A camera, a notepad, and a flashlight seemed enough, or so I thought. The door, though seemingly solid, opened with a gentle push, as if inviting me inside. Once inside, things were even stranger. Every surface reflected my image in a subtly distorted way, as though the house was playing tricks on me. My first impressions were a mix of wonder and discomfort. The rooms were vast and empty, except for a few pieces of furniture covered in dust and faded cloths. But the silence, the silence was deafening. There was no sound of wind, not even the echo of my footsteps, just a void that seemed to swallow everything around it. As I explored, something caught my attention. A small handprint on one of the glass walls. It was sharp, as if recently made, but there was no one there. I ran my fingers over it, but as I turned around, I felt a cold draft pass by me. I looked around but saw nothing. I kept walking, jotting down every detail in my notebook. It was strange how the reflections seemed to follow me, even when I stood still. At one point, I felt as if my image in the glass took an extra second to move, as though I was being watched by a version of myself trapped inside the house. Upstairs, I found something even more disturbing, a child's room. Old toys were scattered across the floor, and a small bed was positioned in the center of the room. On the glass wall, there were more handprints, this time accompanied by faint streaks that looked like tears running down. My flashlight flickered for a moment, and I heard the sound of light footsteps behind me. I spun around quickly, but no one was there. I took a deep breath and laughed at myself, but my laughter died the moment I saw something reflected in the glass ahead of me. It was a child, standing by the door, staring straight at me. I spun around again, my heart racing, but the room was empty. Sweat dripped down my forehead as I tried to steady my nerves. I grabbed my camera and snapped a few photos of the reflection, but the child was no longer there. That's when I noticed the silence had changed. Now, I could hear whispers, faint, distant, but unmistakable. They came from downstairs. Against every instinct, I followed the sounds, descending the stairs slowly, each step creaking beneath my feet. I reached the main hall, but it looked different. The shadows seemed longer, the reflections darker. In the center of the hall, I saw an old chair that hadn't been there before, and on it, a porcelain doll with a sinister smile that seemed to watch me. Suddenly, all the walls reflected the same thing, the child. It was on every glass surface, staring at me with hollow, empty eyes. A shiver ran down my spine, and my flashlight fell from my hand, rolling away. As I bent down to pick it up, I heard a faint laugh, coming from everywhere at once. It was the first sign that the glass house wouldn't let me leave so easily. I don't know what was more disturbing: the whispers that seemed to echo through the house, or the muffled sound of my own breathing, quickened by adrenaline. Every reflection in the glass seemed to follow me, as if the entire place was alive and aware of my every move. Still, I forced myself to keep going. As a journalist, that was my job. But as a person, I began to wonder if it had been a mistake to enter this place. The main hall was wrapped in growing darkness. My hands trembled as I adjusted the flashlight. I needed a break. I needed to understand what was happening. But before I could sit down or collect my thoughts, I noticed something strange in the glass wall to my left. The child was there again. But this time, it wasn't just a reflection. It was clearer, almost physical. A pale figure, wearing old clothes and with deep eyes that didn't blink. She raised a small hand and touched the glass on the opposite side of me, leaving a clear mark. My flashlight flickered once again, and when the light stabilized, she had vanished. Something inside me wanted to run at that moment. Every instinct screamed that I should turn and flee from the house and never look back. But at the same time, something pulled me to stay. There was a story here, something no one had told, something I needed to uncover. That was what kept me going. I went back upstairs, trying to revisit the child's room. But when I reached it, the place looked different. The toys had been moved, as if someone had shifted them. The bed, which had been empty before, now had a dented pillow, as if someone had recently lain there. A soft sound caught my attention. It was a melody, like a lullaby, but played slowly and disturbingly. It came from a corner of the room, where there appeared to be just a glass wall. Cautiously approaching, I realized that the glass was false. It hid a passage. Behind that wall, there was a narrow, completely dark corridor, which didn't seem to be part of the original design of the house. It was as if that space had been intentionally hidden. As I illuminated the path with my flashlight, I noticed that the walls here were not made of glass, like the rest of the house. They were concrete, cold and damp to the touch. I followed the corridor for a few meters until I reached a heavy wooden door. When I opened it, I was shocked to find a small room. There was no furniture, just more handprints scattered across the walls. But in the center, there was something that made my heart race. A small child's diary with a worn leather cover. I picked up the diary carefully, feeling the symbolic weight of it. The pages were filled with drawings and childish writing. The first sentence I was able to decipher made my blood run cold. "The house won't let me leave." I kept flipping through the pages, seeing scribbles of faces without eyes, large figures that looked like shadows, and drawings of the house itself. The more I read, the clearer it became that the child, whoever they were, had been trapped in this place for a long time. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me, a sharp crack, like wood breaking. I spun around quickly, but there was nothing, just the darkness of the corridor. My heart pounded faster than the sound around me. The diary was now in my hands like a shield, as though holding it might protect me from what was coming. I began to walk back down the corridor, quickening my pace, trying to ignore the sensation that something was following me. When I returned to the room, I noticed that the lullaby had stopped, but the silence that replaced it was worse. It was thick, suffocating, as if the house itself was holding its breath. When I finally reached the main hall, I thought about leaving, but something stopped me. The glass walls were covered with new handprints, hundreds of them, as though dozens of children had touched them at the same time. And in the center of the hall, there was something new. An old music box, spinning slowly and playing the same disturbing melody I had heard earlier in the room. I didn't know what to do. Stay or leave? Explore further or abandon everything? It felt as though the house knew I was vulnerable and was toying with my mind. And then I saw it again. The child. She was reflected in every glass surface, but now she was smiling. A cold smile, as if she was pleased to know that I wouldn't have the courage to leave anytime soon. I knew I couldn't turn back now. Something inside me, stronger than the fear, pushed me forward. The house, with its glass and secrets, seemed to challenge me to uncover everything. But there was something terribly wrong about all of this. The walls, the glass, the diary that was still in my hands. I felt like I was being watched, that something or someone didn't want me to find out what was behind this place. The music from the music box was still resonating in the hall, but now it sounded more distorted, as if the very sound was twisting, trying to escape. As I took another step toward the center of the room, I noticed that the glass figures had become sharper, more present, and there was something in their eyes. They weren't just reflections. They seemed to be watching me for real. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But before I could react, a shadow appeared on the glass wall to my right. It was the child, but this time, she was different. Her face was distorted, her eyes larger, almost as if she were trying to swallow me. It wasn't the reflection of a human being, but something warped, a form that shouldn't exist. I knew I couldn't stay there. The air was thicker now, and every breath felt more difficult. My eyes fixed on the music box, as if it had some kind of power over me, a power I didn't fully understand. Every turn of that box seemed like a spell, pulling me closer to the truth, but also pulling me further from my sanity. Then I realized that the environment around me had changed. It wasn't just an ordinary house anymore. The glass walls were shifting, as if they were twisting, creating new paths. I was in a labyrinth of reflections and echoes, where reality seemed to be unraveling. The glass, which had once been transparent, now seemed opaque, as if time and space were being distorted there. The diary in my hands was warm, as if it had a life of its own. I started flipping through it again, trying to find more clues. The last page was filled with chaotic drawings, a mix of human figures and monstrous creatures, all with empty eyes, but somehow more present than any real being. And then, I found another message. I saw them through the glass. They want me to stay here with them. Panic began to rise inside me. Who were they? What exactly was I dealing with? The feeling that something was watching me from every corner of the house became unbearable. I decided it was time to find an exit. It didn't matter what happened anymore. I needed to leave. When I started walking back to the corridor, the sound of my footsteps seemed to echo in a distorted way, as if the space was deforming. I no longer knew if what I was seeing was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. Everything around me seemed like a nightmare, a scenario twisted between the real and the unreal. The house seemed alive in some way, and I was just a pawn in this game. As I turned a corner in the corridor, I found a door I had never noticed before. It was a dark wooden door, worn, almost as if it had been hidden. Without hesitation, I opened it. What I found behind it was something I could never have predicted. What appeared to be an ordinary room was, in fact, filled with mirrors. Mirrors everywhere. I was surrounded by reflections of myself, but there was something terribly wrong with these reflections. Instead of seeing myself as I was, I saw shadowy figures, as if other people were watching me through these mirrors. In the background, I realized that it wasn't me being reflected, but a distorted version of myself. The mirrors began to move. They twisted, distorting the room even further. The sensation of disorientation took over me. I began to lose track of where I was and who I was. My mind, once focused on finding answers, was now fragmenting. It was as if the house was invading my consciousness, making it impossible to distinguish what was real from what wasn't. The whispers returned, louder now. I could hear my name being called, but I didn't know where it was coming from. The voice was everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a presence, something that couldn't be seen but was there, in every corner, in every reflection. I wanted to close my eyes, to stop seeing, but I knew that wouldn't help. I needed to face what was happening, and quickly. At that moment, I realized something horrifying. One of the figures in the mirrors was smiling at me. It wasn't a friendly smile, but a smile of malice, as if it knew I couldn't escape from there. And then, the child appeared again. This time in all the mirrors, in all the reflections. She was smiling too, but it wasn't a child's smile. It was the smile of something much older, something that had seen too much and had lost all innocence. The truth began to reveal itself, but it was already too late. I was trapped, not just physically, but in my own mind. I had become part of the reflection, part of the house. There was no way out anymore. I could no longer distinguish where reality ended and the nightmare began. I was trapped, but at the same time, something kept pushing me forward. The house, with its glass walls, mirrors, and reflections, seemed to be swallowing me, turning me into part of its enigma. I could feel something watching every move I made, something I couldn't see, but I knew was there, waiting. The child, or whatever that figure was, kept following me. Her smile, that sinister smile, spread across every mirror, extending as if she were everywhere in the house at the same time. I wanted to run, escape to a place where that figure couldn't reach me. But no matter how hard I tried, every door, every path seemed to lead me back to the same place. The main hall, where it all began. The air was thick, and the sound of the music box, still echoing through the glass walls, seemed louder than ever. Each note made my heart beat faster, as if each turn of that box was trapping me in an invisible web. The sound was taking over, making me lose control. I was starting to go mad. I knew that, but there was something more. Something that was beginning to form in my mind. The words from the diary, the images in the mirrors, the glass figures, all of it was starting to connect. Something was happening inside that house, something beyond me, something ancient. The glass figures were moving, and I saw one of them approaching me. It wasn't a reflection, but a creature, something alive, inside that glass. It seemed to want to speak to me, but its mouth didn't move, only its eyes fixed on me, with an intensity that made me freeze. I tried to move away, but the figure kept following me. I could no longer see clearly. The glass walls were becoming cloudy, as if they were fogging up. My mind was starting to fail. My memories were distorting. I didn't know what was real anymore. Every thought seemed to dissolve before it could reach any conclusion. I was lost. That's when I heard a voice. It wasn't the child, nor one of the glass figures. It was a deep voice, as if it came from the very walls of the house. "You're here because you can't leave." The voice sounded familiar, but I couldn't identify where it was coming from. All I knew was that it wasn't a human voice. I tried to scream, but my throat was dry. The voice continued, "The house chooses who stays, and you are already part of it." A sense of hopelessness took over me. The house was alive, and somehow, I was now part of its nightmare. I was no longer a person, but a piece, a reflection. I could feel it in every part of my body. The glass walls began to move again, and this time, they weren't distorted. They were closing in, as if they wanted to swallow me. I had nowhere to go. The feeling of being surrounded by something invisible consumed me. That's when the music box played its last note. The sound that once was soft and hypnotic now sounded grotesque. The notes twisted in a painful way, as if they were tearing through the air. I knew this was the end, that the house had won. No more escape. The glass figure that had been watching me was now right in front of me, her eyes filled with hatred, as if she was preparing to consume me. I tried to resist. I tried to fight against the feeling that I was losing my identity, but it was useless. I was being pulled into an abyss, a spiral that had no end. The reflection of my own face, now distorted, appeared in front of me, and that's when I realized. I was no longer looking at myself, but at a deformed, monstrous version of myself. The house had transformed me, and I was now part of it, one of the many lost souls that inhabited its glass walls. Fear overtook me, not the fear of being devoured or destroyed, but the fear of being forgotten. I was disappearing. I no longer existed for the world outside. I was no longer a person. I was just a reflection, a shadow, a memory in a house full of secrets. There was no escape anymore. There was no time. And so, little by little, I was consumed by the house. My soul dissolved into its mirrors and glass, my existence erased from any memory. The house would continue to devour others, drawing in those who dared to enter, making them lose themselves, transform, until they became part of the nightmare it represented. And so, the child and all the glass figures would continue to wait for the next soul to be absorbed.